Millionaire found his black adoptive mother, who had been missing for 30 years, in a nursing home when he went to make a donation. "Please, sir, she can't stay here anymore. She's causing too much trouble for the other residents," begged the head nurse, practically dragging a 72-year-old black woman through the corridors of the Golden Years nursing home. David Thompson immediately stopped signing the $500,000 check he was writing to the nursing home. At 35, the CEO of one of Chicago's largest construction companies never imagined that a simple charitable donation would change his life forever. The elderly woman resisted weakly, whispering incomprehensible words as the employee tried to force her back into her room. Her gray hair was disheveled, and she was wearing a worn hospital gown, but there was something in her eyes that made David feel an inexplicable chill. "What's going on here?" he asked. Interrupting the awkward scene, the nurse, clearly irritated by the interruption, sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. It's the patient in room 247, Rosa Johnson. She has advanced dementia and keeps disturbing the other residents with her fantasies about a son who never existed." David felt something strange in his chest when he heard that name, Rosa Johnson. Why did it sound familiar? "What kind of fantasies?" he asked slowly, approaching. "She swears she had a son named David, who became very rich and successful. She spends all day drawing buildings and saying he's coming back for her. It's sad. But you know how it is with these dementia cases. Sometimes they invent entire lives." David's world stopped, his name, buildings, the physical resemblance he now noticed in the delicate features of that woman. Even though she was aged and frail, Rosa looked up and fixed her eyes directly on him. For a moment that seemed eternal. She appeared to regain complete lucidity. "David, my boy, you've grown so much," she whispered in a voice that awakened memories buried for decades. The nurse laughed nervously. "See, she does that with every man who shows up. She thinks everyone is her imaginary son." But David was no longer listening. His legs trembled as fragmented images flooded his mind. A black woman singing lullabies, carrying hands preparing oatmeal, the smell of homemade cookies, a sweet voice calling my prince before bedtime. "Rosa," he murmured, testing the name on his lips. "Rosa Johnson." Her eyes filled with tears. "Do you remember Mama Rosa, my love?" David had been adopted at age 5 by a wealthy white family after his nanny had personal problems and had to leave. According to what his adoptive parents had always told him, he never questioned the story, never sought answers. But now, looking at the woman the social worker had forced to disappear from his life 3 decades ago, he began to understand that his golden childhood had been built on a terrible lie. "How did you get here?" he asked. Trying to keep his voice steady, the nurse quickly intervened. "Mr. Thompson, don't worry about it. We'll take her back to her room and we can continue with your generous donation," I asked her, David exploded. Surprising the employee with the intensity of his voice, Rosa weakly held his hand. "They said you were better off without a poor black nanny. They said I was no good at taking care of a child. They sent me away and I could never see you again." At that moment, David realized that his entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie, and someone was going to pay dearly for stealing 30 years of his life with the only person who truly loved him. As Rosa whispered fragments of memories he thought he had lost forever, David felt a cold fury growing inside him. Who had orchestrated this separation? And why had his adoptive parents never told him the truth? If this story of a stolen family and buried lies touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because the revenge David was about to plan would be as calculated as it was brutal. Over the next 3 days, David canceled all his meetings and spent every free minute at the Golden Years nursing home. With each conversation with Rosa, more fragments of his real childhood emerged like shards of glass, cutting through the carefully constructed lies. "You liked Mickey Mouse-shaped pancakes," Rosa whispered during one of his visits, her eyes shining with moments of crystal-clear lucidity. "And you always asked me to tell you the story of the boy who built castles in the sky." David felt his chest tighten. He vaguely remembered that story. But his adoptive parents, Richard and Margaret Thompson, always said they were childhood fantasies when he mentioned them. "Rosa, tell me what really happened that day. The day you left," her eyes filled with terror, as if reliving a nightmare. "The man in the suit came with papers. He said I was no good, that white children needed white families. He said, if I didn't leave quietly, they would arrest me for kidnapping." "What man?" "What was his name?" "Mr. Morrison, Charles Morrison. He worked for the state. He said he handled delicate situations for important families." David felt his blood run cold. Charles Morrison was a well-known name in Chicago social circles. A lawyer specializing in private adoptions for the elite. He had died 5 years ago, but his firm was still operating. "He gave me $500 and said it was for me to start a new life. But I didn't want money. I wanted my boy." The head nurse approached with her usual irritation. "Mr. Thompson, I must ask you not to encourage these fantasies of hers. Rosa gets agitated for days after these conversations." David turned slowly, his voice cutting like ice. "Fantasies? You mean real memories of how a woman was blackmailed into abandoning the child she was raising? Mr. Thompson, I understand your compassion, but Rosa Johnson has a history of psychotic episodes. She was admitted here after being found wandering the streets, raving about lost children, and who admitted her? Who paid for her care all these years?" The nurse hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "That's confidential information." David took out his cell phone and called his assistant, Jake. "I need you to investigate everything about a certain nurse, Patricia Wells, from Golden Years. Professional history, connections, who signs her checks. I want a full report in 2 hours." Patricia turned pale. "Mr. Thompson, this is unnecessary." "You know what's unnecessary?" David exploded. "A 72-year-old woman being over-medicated to control fantasies that are actually real traumatic memories?" That night, David was in his penthouse apartment when Jake called with information that made his world completely fall apart. "David, you won't believe what I found. Patricia Wells receives an extra $2,000 monthly payment from an offshore account. The account is controlled by Morrison and Associates, Charles Morrison's firm, the very same, and there's more. Rosa Johnson wasn't admitted for wandering the streets. She was transferred directly from a private psychiatric clinic where she had been hospitalized for 25 years. David dropped the glass of whiskey he was holding. 25 years. She was forcibly hospitalized, it seems so. And guess who authorized the original hospitalization and paid for decades of treatment? Richard Thompson, her adoptive father. The betrayal was so profound that David felt physically nauseous. The man he called father had not only stolen Rosa from his life, but had locked her away in a psychiatric clinic to ensure she could never tell the truth. The next day, David arrived at the nursing home with a private medical team. "Rosa, I've brought some doctors to examine you. Real doctors who work for me." Dr. Amanda Foster, a renowned neurologist, spent 3 hours examining Rosa. Her conclusions were devastating. "Mr. Thompson, this woman does not have dementia. She has clear signs of severe psychological trauma and the effects of prolonged inappropriate psychiatric medication. Someone was deliberately drugging her to keep her confused." David confronted Patricia Wells at the reception desk, his voice low but deadly. "How long have you known that Rosa doesn't have dementia?" "I just follow medical orders," she said. "Orders from whom?" "From Dr. Morrison." Patricia began to tremble. "Mr. Thompson, please, I have a family to support." And Rosa had a family too. A family that was destroyed for dirty money. David moved closer, his eyes cold as steel. "You have 24 hours to hand over all of Rosa's real medical records from the last 30 years. Everything. And if I find out you've hidden even a single page..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, while Rosa slept peacefully for the first time in decades, free from the drugs that kept her sedated, David was in his office meticulously planning something that would destroy everyone responsible for 3 decades of psychological torture. Each document David uncovered revealed deeper layers of a conspiracy that involved not only his adoptive family, but an entire network of lawyers, doctors, and institutions that profited from separating families and erasing inconvenient histories. And when Patricia Wells finally handed over the secret files the next morning, she had no idea that she was providing the weapons for the complete destruction of a system that for decades had turned love into profit and memories into controlled nightmares. The files Patricia handed over were a sinister goldmine. David spent the entire night in his office analyzing 30 years of falsified medical records, bank transfers, and a network of corruption that went far beyond what he had imagined. "Jake, I need you to cancel all my appointments for the next few days," he said on the phone at 6 US AM, "and call Michael Rodriguez." Michael Rodriguez was the best investigative lawyer in Chicago, specializing in cases of institutional corruption. More importantly, he hated the corrupt elite as much as David was beginning to hate them. 3 hours later, Michael was in David's office, leafing through the documents with growing disbelief. "David, this is explosive. We're talking about a criminal operation involving at least 2 wealthy families, a law firm, 3 psychiatric clinics, and state officials. How many other children have they separated from their families?" Michael pointed to a spreadsheet. "From the records I can identify here, at least 15 cases in the last 40 years, always the same pattern. A child from a poor family being raised by nannies, maids, or poor relatives. A wealthy family interested in adoption. A convenient psychiatric diagnosis to remove the original caregiver." David felt nauseous. 15 families destroyed. And that's just what we've been able to track. The scheme could be much bigger. That afternoon, David visited Rosa at Golden Years. She was lucid for the first time in decades, free of the drugs that had kept her confused. Her eyes sparkled with an intelligence that had been suppressed by medication. David, my boy, you've grown so much. I always knew you would become someone important, Rosa. I need to ask you some difficult questions about what happened. She nodded bravely. I'm ready. I've spent 30 years waiting for someone to listen to me. Do you remember other cases? Other nannies or caregivers who disappeared like you? Rosa closed her eyes, concentrating. I remember Carmen, who took care of the Mitchell twins. One day she just disappeared, and the children were adopted by their employers. And there was Martha, who raised the Wilsons' daughter since she was a baby. David wrote down each name. Are they alive? Carmen managed to escape from the clinic after a few years, but she never saw the children again. Martha wasn't so lucky. What happened to Martha? She resisted more than the others. She tried to sue the family to expose the scheme. They found her dead at home 3 weeks later. Overdose, they said. David felt anger rising like volcanic lava. Rosa, I'm going to destroy them all. Every single person who took part in this will pay. My boy, be careful. These people are very powerful. They don't know who they're messing with now. That night, David received an unexpected call. It was Richard Thompson, his adoptive father. David, I hear you've been visiting that nursing home. I hope you're not letting yourself be fooled by the fantasies of a psychiatric patient. The coldness in Richard's voice made David realize how blind he had been for so many years. What kind of fantasies, Dad? This woman, Rosa Johnson, has a history of psychotic episodes. She believes that every child she sees is a lost child. It's sad, but you need to understand that she's sick. Interesting. And how do you know so much about her medical condition? There was a significant pause. Well, when we heard you were visiting her, I inquired about the case out of paternal concern. David smiled coldly. Richard was lying. And they both knew it, I see. Thank you for your concern, David. Perhaps you should stop these visits. It could be emotionally damaging for you to cling to the fantasies of an unstable woman. Don't worry, Dad. I know exactly what I'm doing. After hanging up, David called Michael. They took the bait. Richard just called me trying to keep me away from Rosa. That confirms they're monitoring my activities. Perfect. That means they're nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. Michael, I found 3 more living victims of the scheme, and we have evidence they may have murdered a woman who tried to resist. David, this is no longer just about civil corruption. We're talking about murder. I need to bring someone from the prosecutor's office in. Do you know anyone reliable? I know Prosecutor Janet Williams. She specializes in white-collar crime and institutional corruption. And she has a very interesting characteristic. She hates it when rich people think they're above the law. The next day, David was sitting in a private room at the courthouse, face to face with Prosecutor Williams. She was a 45-year-old black woman with intelligent eyes and a reputation for never losing important cases. Mr. Thompson, what you've brought me is extraordinary. If we can prove half of what's in these documents, we're going to dismantle one of the largest family corruption networks in Chicago history. Prosecutor, I have unlimited resources for this investigation. Money, technology, contacts, whatever you need. And I have something money can't buy, legal authority to arrest all those sons of... David smiled for the first time in days. He finally had an ally with real power. There's one thing I need to know. Janet continued, why are you doing this? You could just get Rosa back and go on with your rich, comfortable life. Why risk everything to destroy your own adoptive family? David looked out the window, where he could see the Chicago skyline, a city built by powerful people who thought they could do anything. Because for 30 years, an extraordinary woman was locked up in a psychiatric clinic, drugged against her will, separated from the son she loved, while I grew up in a carefully constructed lie. And because if they did that to her, they did it to others. How many families destroyed to satisfy the whims of rich people who think they can buy anything, even a mother's love? Janet nodded in approval. So, you understand that this will destroy your own life? Too, when this story explodes, you'll discover that every good memory of your childhood was built on someone else's suffering. I already know that. And I'd rather live with the painful truth than continue to be an accomplice to a lie that ruined lives. Very well. We have work to do. That night, David returned to Golden Years. Rosa was in the garden looking at the stars. How are you feeling? For the first time in 30 years, I feel like I can really breathe. It's strange to have a clear mind again, Rosa. I need to warn you. What we're about to do will attract a lot of attention. It could be dangerous. She held his hand with surprising strength. My boy, I spent 3 decades in hell, controlled by people who thought they could break my spirit. They never succeeded. Now that I have you back, they're going to find out what it really means to face a mother fighting for justice. David looked into Rosa's eyes and saw where he had inherited his own determination. She was not the fragile victim everyone thought she was. She was a warrior who had survived decades of psychological torture, waiting for the right moment to strike back. While David meticulously built his network of allies and evidence, Richard Thompson and his accomplices had no idea that their every move was being documented, every phone call recorded, every bank transfer tracked. They still saw David as the obedient adopted son who had always believed their lies. They didn't know that the empire of corruption they had spent decades building was about to collapse at the hands of the one person they never thought of as a threat, the very victim they had created. The operation began on a Tuesday morning at exactly 6:30 a.m. When federal agents simultaneously raided 17 different addresses in Chicago. David was in the office of U.S. Attorney Janet Williams, watching everything unfold on multiple computer screens showing the arrests in real time. Team Alpha, Richard Thompson is in custody, echoed over the radio. Team Bravo, Dr. Patricia Wells arrested without resistance. Team Charlie, documents seized at Morrison and Associates. David felt a cold satisfaction watching Richard Thompson, the man he had called father for 30 years, being handcuffed on the porch of the family mansion. Through the screen, he could see the panic in Richard's eyes as he realized he was no longer a powerful man, but just another criminal facing justice. "David, are you sure you want to watch this?" Janet asked, noticing the intensity on his face. 30 years. District Attorney Rosa spent 30 years being drugged in a psychiatric clinic, while this man slept peacefully in a silk bed. Not only do I want to watch, I want them to see my face when they realize that the son they raised was the one who destroyed them. David's phone rang. It was Richard calling from the police station. "David, for God's sake, this is a terrible misunderstanding. You need to get me out of here, misunderstanding," David replied with deadly calm. Like the misunderstanding of separating a child from the only person who truly loved her, or the misunderstanding of keeping an innocent woman drugged for decades to hide your crimes. "Son, you don't understand. We did it for you. That woman couldn't give you the life you deserved. We gave you an education, opportunities, love. David laughed bitterly. "You gave me lies wrapped in privilege, and you know what amuses me the most? You were so arrogant that you never imagined I would find out. You thought I was the grateful little boy who would always believe your stories." Richard was silent for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of his defeat. "What do you want, David? Money? We can make a deal. I don't want your dirty money. I want you to face exactly what Rosa faced. Losing everything you love and being left alone. Forgotten, abandoned by everyone. On the screen, David saw Margaret Thompson being led away by the agents. She screamed hysterically, realizing that her life of luxury was over forever. That afternoon, District Attorney Williams' press conference was broadcast live across. Carmen Rodriguez, one of the victims Rosa had mentioned, spoke into the microphone with tears in her eyes. "I lost my twin sons 20 years ago. They said I was no good, that I was mentally ill. Today, I found out that my babies are alive and living 40 minutes from my house." The public reaction was devastating for the criminals. Justice Rosa became a national trending topic. Protests formed in front of the psychiatric clinics involved. Wealthy families who had adopted through the scheme were publicly exposed. David received a call from Margaret Thompson that night. Her voice was unrecognizable from crying so much. "David, please, our reputation is destroyed. We've lost everything. The house, the businesses, our friends. No one wants to talk to us. You got what you wanted." "No, Margaret, I got what Rosa deserved. Justice, but we really love you. You were our son. You loved the version of me that suited you. The rich, obedient boy who validated your imaginary goodness. But you never loved me enough to tell me the truth about who I really was." 3 days later, David was visiting Rosa in her new home, a comfortable residence he had bought in the best neighborhood in Chicago, with a kind caregiver and all the medical support she needed. "How do you feel seeing them pay for what they did?" she asked, sitting in the garden she had specifically requested, just like the one she had when he was a child. "I feel like I can finally breathe. All my life, something inside me knew that something was missing. Now I know what it was. You, my real family." Rosa held his hand. "And now, what do we do with our second chance? Now we make sure this never happens to anyone else. I'm going to use every penny I have to create a national system to protect vulnerable families. And I'm going to fund lawyers for each of the 15 families they destroyed." That night, David received one last call from Richard Thompson. "David, I wanted to ask for forgiveness. I know we made terrible choices, Richard. You had 30 years to ask for forgiveness, 30 years to tell me the truth. You chose to keep Rosa locked up and drugged in a clinic. The only thing that gives me peace is knowing that you will spend the rest of your lives experiencing the abandonment you imposed on her. But you're not like that. You're better than us. You're right. I am better. That's why I chose justice over revenge. You're going to prison through the legal system, not through violence. But don't confuse justice with forgiveness. Forgiveness is something Rosa may be able to offer one day. I cannot. Richard hung up, defeated, knowing he had lost not only a son, but any right to ask for mercy. While David finally embraced Rosa with no guilt or lies between them, across town 3 families who had bought children through, the scheme faced an impossible choice. Return the children they loved to their biological families, or face the wrath of an entire country that now knew the truth. And one of those families held a secret that even David hadn't discovered. A secret that would prove that the criminal network was even larger and more sinister than any investigation had revealed. 2 years later, David was in the office of his new project, the Rosa Johnson Foundation for Family Protection. Through the panoramic windows, he could see the former Golden Years nursing home, now transformed into the Rosa Johnson Welcome Center, where families separated by criminal schemes received free support to reunite. Mr. Thompson, we have 15 more families who have been reunited this month, reported Amanda, his executive director, and 3 new cases of similar criminal networks have been uncovered in other states. Rosa entered the office carrying a tray of homemade cookies, just as she had done when he was a child, at 74. She radiated a peace that David had never seen in anyone else. How are our boys doing? She asked, referring to the other 15 children who had been reunited with their biological families. They're adjusting well. Carmen managed to complete the nursing course she dropped out of 20 years ago. The Mitchell twins are helping their biological mother open a small bakery. The phone rang. It was Janet Williams. Now the state's Attorney General, David. Richard Thompson has filed another appeal. It has been denied. He will serve the full 25 years. Through the prison security cameras, David had seen Richard a few times. The man who once commanded boardrooms now cleaned bathrooms and faced the contempt of other inmates who had discovered his crimes against children. Margaret had suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was in a psychiatric clinic, ironically being medicated against her will, just as Rosa had been, and Dr. Patricia Wells. She lost her medical license permanently. She works as a cleaner in a public hospital. Apparently, none of her colleagues want to talk to her. David hung up and looked at Rosa, who was watching a family hugging in the garden of the shelter through the window. Do you feel sorry for them? He asked. I feel sorry for what they chose to become, Rosa replied wisely. But I don't feel sorry for the consequences. They had decades to do the right thing. That afternoon, David received an unexpected call from a CNN reporter. Mr. Thompson, we've heard that Hollywood wants to buy the rights to your story. Is that true? Yes, but any money from the film will be donated in full to the foundation. Rosa and I don't need to profit from our suffering. David and Rosa's story had become a national phenomenon. The documentary 30 Years of Lies won 3 Emmys. Universities included the case in courses on ethics and human rights. 5 states passed stricter laws against illegal adoption schemes. But for David, the greatest trophy sat next to him every morning, drinking coffee and telling stories from a childhood he could finally remember. Do you know what makes me happiest? Rosa said, watching a child playing in the garden with the parents she had found. What? Knowing that our pain has become healing for other people, that every tear I shed was worth it, so that other mothers wouldn't have to go through the same thing. David hugged Rosa, smelling the familiar scent of cookies and affection that his memory had stored for 3 decades. Richard Thompson had tried to buy love but discovered that he had only bought a lie. He tried to destroy a family but ended up destroying his own. He thought that power and money would make him immune to the consequences, but he learned that some debts are collected with 3 decades of interest. David looked around his office, decorated with photos of all the families they had managed to reunite, certificates of recognition, and a framed photo of him and Rosa on the day they were reunited. Mom Rosa, tonight there's another family reuniting at the center. Would you like to come with me to see it? Always, my son, always. As they walked down the hallway together, David realized he had found something that no amount of money could buy. The peace of being exactly where he belonged, with a person who had loved him since the first day of his life. Richard Thompson tried to steal 30 years from a family, but ended up losing the rest of his own life. He discovered that the most painful revenge is not that carried out with anger, but that served with love, justice, and the satisfaction of seeing his crimes transformed into hope for others. If this story of justice and family reunification touched your heart, subscribe to the channel